Season 3.
Welcome to Hot Pot Talks as part of the panel series for Bitter Oriental's Yellow Peril Unmasked. My name is Jen Sunshine, here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, David Ng. Together, we are the co-artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective that produces intersectional and intergenerational film and artwork from underrepresented communities of color. We're also founding members of the Vancouver Artists Labor Union Cooperative, also known as Value Co-op, which is an artist-run worker cooperative whose goal is to provide flexible living wage income to artists. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we are gathered here today from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Part of our work as labor activists and queer artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back. Hot Pot Talks emerged during the pandemic from our collaboration with the Lim Association in Chinatown, historically a neighborhood of Chinese railroad laborers who were brought in to settle Indigenous territories as part of the ongoing colonial project.
Yeah, so why Hot Pot Talks? As Jen mentioned, Value Co-op, we have a studio in the Lim Sai Hor Khao Mok Association building. And part of what we did when we moved into the neighborhood and recognizing the role that artists played in gentrification in the neighborhood, we built a relationship with the Lim Association. And so this project, including Bitter Orientals and Hot Pot Talks, grows out of this now, I think, oh my goodness, Jen, 2-year collaboration that we've been doing with the Lim Association. Now, that being said, over the past 2 years, a lot of stuff has happened in the neighborhood, and a lot of issues have been brought to the surface, including already existing yellow peril narratives that have reemerged again during the pandemic. We've seen Chinatowns and elders being targeted by racial violence and vandalism. We've seen the rise of boba liberal organizing around Stop Asian Hate, demands for hate crime legislation, which is pro-police, pro-surveillance, and harms Black and Indigenous communities. As I mentioned, we've also seen increasing gentrification eating away at the souls of Chinatowns and other BIPOC communities, seemingly with no end in sight. We are bitter Orientals indeed. And so, yeah, as I mentioned, Bitter Orientals Yellow Peril Unmasked grows from the engaging Chinatown work that we've been doing with the association, as well as our organizing on issues related to anti-Asian racism. So this panel series, this is the first of a few. We'll touch on themes of diaspora, xenophobia, systemic racism, intersectional solidarity building, and Chinatown futurities. So you may have noticed some red envelopes, some special, I should say, red envelopes in our intro video. So we designed these Defund the Police red envelopes that are on sale right now. And the link is being dropped in the chat. So if you're interested in purchasing them, you can purchase them. And proceeds will go from the sales of these envelopes go to the Defund 604 network.
Amazing. I want to first also thank our incredible team, Ava and Cameron, who are behind the scenes here with us today, who helped make Hot Pot Talks a reality. So without further ado, we are so excited to introduce our guest today, Angela Macdougall, Executive Director of Bwss, Battered Women's Support Services. Through her community-based organizing, frontline work, and activism over 3+ decades, Angela Marie Macdougall has been deeply involved in movements for social justice. She is a longstanding member of Vancouver's February 14th Women's Memorial March, the first women's memorial march held since 1992 in response to the murder of a woman in the Vancouver neighborhood named the Downtown Eastside. She is a founding member of Intersectional Feminist Justice Research and Organizing Collaborative, bringing together researchers, academics, data and policy analysts, students, and community organizers to provide critical research, data, policy, and strategic support for ending violence, gender equity, and social justice movements. Welcome, Angela.
Oh,
Hi,
my
Angela.
goodness. We're exhausted after that bio.
You had an even longer bio that we had to cut through so much to piece together this.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. I am thrilled. Simply
We're so happy to have you. Angela, before we began, we thought, we're so honored that you're joining us in this to have this conversation. We thought to set the sort of foreground of this talk. Jen, I thought maybe Jen and I could answer
Mhm.
actually the question, why can't we talk about anti-Asian racism without talking about abolition? Jen, do you want to go?
Well,
Yeah.
okay, so I have to, first I want to acknowledge, like, I have known Angela, I have known you for a very long time, and um, I've really, even though we're in kind of different circles, I've always really admired you from afar. And with your kind of like grassroots involvement, grassroots work in GBV, as well as just like frontline work. And I will admit that, the topic of abolition, it was a struggle to kind of get here, I would say, for David and I, but I'll speak for myself, because I feel like I'm not an expert, and I'm not well versed in this topic at all. So I have my kind of insecurities around that. But this is also why I want to have this conversation, so I can like practice and actually get fully into it and go deeper in the analysis. But on a kind of a for me personally, I like, on a personal note, I want to develop and cultivate a kind of like language that is accessible, so that predominantly I can have this conversation with my own parents, and with other fellow Chinese, peers of mine who have a lack of understanding around abolition, and how that intersects with current conversations around anti-Asian violence. So I'll leave it kind of there, but I would love to kind of get into it with you, David.
Yeah, and I think, over the past 2 years, Jen and I have, in doing, so we started Love Intersections wanting to do anti-racist work. And so when a lot of the anti-Asian violence started happening, and I should preface this by saying, I want to acknowledge that there has been a lot of pain and struggle within the Asian community to navigate this spike in anti-Asian violence. And a lot of the organizing that Jen and I have seen around, particularly around the hate narrative, and particularly the Stop Asian Hate narrative, and a particular movement to get anti-Asian hate crimes anti-Asian violence legislated as a hate crime. And we've seen in other jurisdictions that becoming a tool for the police to increase funding.
Mm-hmm.
Really struggling with how Jen and I really sort of struggled with, okay, so how do we actually address this and organize around it? Because this hate narrative sort of erases how anti-Asian racism is, and racism is structurally produced for a white nationalist agenda,
Mm-hmm.
for colonialism, you know, and of course built upon anti-Black racism as well. And so that's sort of where this, I think, one of the many threads of how this conversation, or how this, the genesis of this Hot Pot Talks was really wanting to address this term boba liberal. For those who are new to this term, it's this sort of like bubble tea. Oh, we experience racism to look at my bubble tea culture. But that's sort of this very surface level claims or demands for recognition of racism that ignores the systemic anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism that
Is
Canada is
so
built.
entrenched in the communities as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, I don't want to take up too much more time, but I thought it was important for us to at least, honor this conversation with why the genesis of this talk. But maybe the first question we could start off with, Angela, is what brought you to this work of abolition?
I love the question, and thank you again for the invitation and for this the introduction, the land acknowledgement, the recognition of these stolen and ancestral territory, and it matters so much. And yes, Jen, it's been incredible to know you all these years, with barely even sitting down and talking with you, but I've always
know.
just felt like this kindred connection and just so much love for you. And I've been watching what you've been doing, David and Jen, what you've been doing around your art and the organizing, and in particular, Love Intersections. And I'm impressed with how authentic the conversations that you're curating. And it is an honor to be here. and I come to the conversation on abolition from a many kind of trajectory, but it really, at the end of the day, in recent times, it's been the result of my own just experience, quite frankly, of what it's meant to first be a Black woman. I'm biracial. I consider myself a biracial Black woman. My maternal family comes from Northern Scandinavia, and my paternal family comes from Western Africa. And I was born in Vancouver during a time when the Vancouver neighborhood known as Hogan's Alley, which was the neighborhood where Black people were convening and living, was razed by a municipal policy, was eliminated. And that's where my parents met back in the late 60s. And and I grew up in Vancouver at the time when that neighborhood was being razed. So I have like very vivid experiences of racism, most definitely, where it intersects with misogyny. But what I experienced as a girl was a lot of attention by police. As a girl, just going to school, and police would stop me and ask me where I was going, and I'm 8, asked me what I was doing in the neighborhood, and I live in the neighborhood. And at the time, I didn't understand it in any kind of way, because in recognition of the lack of being able to analyze that from a race and gender perspective in the context of a Black neighborhood being eliminated. So I have a lot of my own experiences, including being detained by the police when I was 16, where coincidentally, I guess, I was on Gore and Union, walking toward Main Street to catch a bus, and I visited a friend just east of there, and I was detained by the police for several hours while they assumed that I wasn't a Canadian citizen. They thought I was a U.S. citizen, and they because I didn't have ID at the time. It was a stop just because I was walking down the street. There was no reason. So those are kind of my youth and childhood experiences, among a bunch of other kinds of things. But the biggest thing that I have to say about police and abolition, and kind of getting to a place of where I'm thinking around the defund framework, of course, looking at all of the theories and great work of scholar of Angela Davis, who I admire tremendously, and her analysis around this, but also the organizing group Insight, which has done a lot of work around ending gender-based violence in the U.S. and really bringing that analysis. And I attended an event in California, and just at the turn of the millennium, where I got really exposed to ideas that hadn't necessarily been able to nurture here within the anti-violence framework and organizing that was happening in Vancouver. At the end of the day, as I say, it's come down to legitimately trying to work with the police. I worked hard for years to try and work with them around reform. And that has been a large part of what the organization that I work for has done since, at least since the 90s, around trying to tinker with, training and policy and legislation, and trying to work with, different departments and, individuals, and working with all of that, and just really seeing in notwithstanding knowing the history that policing in Canada is a result of legit removing Indigenous people from the land and cordoning Indigenous people onto reserves in order to create the space for European settlers to come and settle in these spaces, as well as enslaved Africans and slave patrols and the hunting down of Africans that have escaped enslavement in order to return the property to the enslavers. So that's the roots of policing in Turtle Island. So notwithstanding that history, I sat down for years attempting to reform, both in terms of policy, but also around attitudes and training. I invested a lot of time, quite frankly, thinking that I could do it. And I learned just very clearly how unwilling not only the Vancouver Police Department, but also the RCMP is to really address their conduct at the core. They were using me for a bit of a PR exercise, and And I have a lot of work to do to redress what I think has been some of the harm that I've done in terms of all of the effort that I put into attempting to reform, knowing
Mm.
that they continue to not follow the policies that have been created, knowing that they have done tremendous violence in this neighborhood, in terms of the Downtown Eastside neighborhood,
Mhm.
and the lack not only of investigations. We had several decades of killings of women
Mhm.
in Vancouver
Mhm.
who that the police did not investigate, blamed for their disappearances.
Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of problems that I've seen firsthand, that I've experienced, that I've seen in how police work here regionally, and then my efforts to think that I could put energy into that institution, and how what a waste of effort that proved to be.
Mhm. And I had a follow-up question. We read that we talked about that press release that you guys had put out a couple weeks ago, and there was a line in there that
It was a month ago, I think.
a month ago.
It's been a month already.
Yeah, we're in February now.
Well, maybe Angela, if you don't mind, the question I was going to say to follow up was there was a line in there that described or talked about how the police are contributing to gender-based violence and the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Um, could you speak to that and maybe give if you don't mind speaking about what we're referring to? Because I thought it was a really on the like something that has happened recently around the recent PR move of the police to sort of try to give them a sense that they're doing good when it's actually the organizations like yours and your partners that are trying to mitigate a lot of the harm that police are doing.
So thank you for that reminder. It seems like a long time ago.
Time. What is time?
And it was just very recently. Yeah, so we did a press release. This is after an incident that happened at the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, where a man attempted to enter the center, and the staff did what they do on the daily in terms of keeping the environment as safe as it can, and preventing anybody that wants to use violence from accessing and doing harm in terms of the Women's Center. And so what the police did was, after there was a report made, they decided to make that a headline, a very explosive headline about a man with a cleaver coming in, and how they came in and rushed in. It appeared from their framing of it that they were saving the day. At that point, the man was long gone. He was disarmed. The harm, the safety, the public safety concern was well, past. And so it just sort of, right now, as we think we can see, the Vancouver Police Department is in a very assertive public relation and media relation campaign, where they're attempting to show everybody how necessary they are, how much work they're doing, how they're keeping everybody safe. It was offensive to us in terms of Bwss and the Downtown Eastside Women's Center and Atira Women's Resource Society and Wish Drop-In Center Society, because we are painfully aware of the ways in which they fail and continue to fail, not only with respect to not one, not two, but three serial killers that were operating in the Downtown Eastside, during a particular span of time, decades of time, and how they not only blamed victims but did not perform their duties, and did serious harm to families. But that continues to present day. I mean, in terms of not investigating violence, that we've really been in. When I say we, and everybody can take that, and to the extent to which they think that's about them, because we all have a different relationship to this idea about policing and abolition. And I'll say the effort has been to create this narrative that the police are keeping women safe, and that they are the resource for women, and particularly around gender-based violence, and that we need to report, and we need to kind of keep them informed, and that they're going to keep us safe. And what we are seeing over and over again is that police are not following through on the policies that they have, around investigations of intimate partner violence, sexualized violence. They are increasingly arresting victims of intimate partner violence, And those victims tend to be Indigenous or Black or of color, in particular immigrant women of color who may not speak English, and they're married to a Canadian man, a European man that has English. And so, and then that shakes down in a very stratified way in terms of neighborhoods, because we have, there's classism is in effect in terms of how neighborhoods have been structured here in Vancouver. And so wherever you are, in the class structure of neighborhoods, with the Downtown Eastside being shaped and characterized as the postal code in the country, determines what kind of response you may or may not get from the police around that. So increasingly women are criminalized. So the last thing we wanted to see was them taking any credit for what happened on that day with respect to the man and the cleaver, at the door at the Downtown Eastside Women's Center.
Yeah. Angela, a few things that you've mentioned brings to mind. I'm thinking about when you're talking about the intersections of class and space as well. It's making me think about, when we think about this discourse on anti-Asian racism is also one that's right now the dominant voices are East Asian, are Chinese, and a lot of the violence, anti-Asian violence that has always existed but never talked about are darker skinned Asians, working class that have Southeast Asians that have faced, also I'm thinking about and your what you were talking about in terms of surveillance and incarceration, and I'm thinking about borders and the colonial mechanism of maintaining borders as well. That is absolutely very much class-based too, and those conversations around anti-Asian racism aren't really being talked about in the sort of dominant liberal stop Asian hate type of bobo liberalism as well. I just wanted to share, since we started the conversation with what brought us to this work of abolition, I have my first major that I did in my undergrad. It's a degree I don't like to talk about a lot because I was 16, 17, very naive, thought I was going to be a lawyer. So I took, and I was an activist in high school. So I took criminology and women's studies.
Of course,
and it was actually, I'll say, it was through criminology. I had some amazing professors at SFU. I can say SFU, right? Yes, I can. that actually introduced me to abolition and introduced me to how the police state, upholds colonialism. But it was most recently, about a year ago, where a really good friend of mine, who's like a family member, was racially profiled on campus. I'm at school right now, and organizing around that and witnessing almost the same thing that you're describing, Angela, the sort of big PR campaign. This isn't the cops, but this is security on campus, where they've now they're increasing security. There's signs all over campus now about they're going to card people, not us. I shouldn't say card us, because we know when they say profile, it's going to be black people, right? And it's all the signs are all over campus now. And so I'll just leave one thing that I would just wanted to also underline too is just referencing defunding the police is that, and I heard this, I was co-facilitating a panel with Elle Jones earlier this week, and she talks about, every single other program has had austerity except for the police. So education, health, everything, arts, education, everything has been cut except for the police. Every year the funds go up. And so
it was wild. It was wild listening to Elle describe the ask for more funding so that they can put in, mental health programs in prisons, and also have Indigenous art so that people in just communities feel somehow more welcome because
culturally appropriate
art
prison
is reflected in a prison. It's absurd.
Yeah.
I love Elle.
Sorry, David. Yeah,
I love Elle Jones. Yeah. Love Elle.
Yeah.
Sorry, David, I cut you off.
No, I didn't. No, please continue.
I am just curious, Angela, because you just if you have any observations or insights in the kind of like the decades long work in the front lines and grassroots organizing, because
you're so old, Angela. How many
Because my
decades?
first introduction to abolition wasn't necessarily the word abolition, the term
Right.
abolition. It was with the prison industrial complex,
Yes.
and then intersecting that, there was, you know, transformative justice, and now we've kind of landed and evolved to abolition. I'm curious if you can describe that pipeline, because I'm not in the front line, so yeah, I'm just ignorant in this kind of that arc. If you can tell us more about that.
Indeed. So and this, you know, I come from this the conversation about incarceration and criminalization through the lens, of course, of gender-based violence, and what we've been, you know, kind of led to believe, or at least think could be, is that the police would be a part of a women's safety plan if they're dealing with an abusive partner. And so we see that that's not the case, and we see increasingly that women are being arrested. If we keep in mind, just like just keep in mind, just as a foundation, that the roots of policing was to criminalize Indigenous people. This is little Boomer. He must make an appearance.
I love it.
Oh,
Super ginger. That, you know, that the police were created to criminalize Indigenous people's existence and to criminalize enslaved Africans and Africans' existence. And so that at the very heart of that, then just existing and living a life on land is to then to come to the attention of the police in terms of all of the ideology and how the effort around maintaining social order, which social order is specifically about a particular version of white settler colonialism. And that we understand that that's the beginning and the middle and the end of policing. Everything else is what you're saying with respect to, you know, let's get some Indigenous art on the, you know, in the jails. And, you know, like, it's quite jarring when we think about it in that sense. But I remember deep and profoundly as a youth, I was watching on some late show. There was a concert of BTO, Black Maternal Overdrive. Anybody knows that group? Very Canadian group. And they were doing a live concert in a prison, Canadian prison in Saskatchewan. I don't remember which prison. And they were showing the band playing, and then they would cut to the crowd. And I remember being astonished when they cut to the crowd of all of the prisoners, and the entire space were Indigenous men. The entire space were, you know, hundreds of Indigenous men. And it was just this visceral moment of thinking, what the fuck? Like what is, like, it just did not fit. Certainly not my own, you know, it just didn't fit. It was just this complete disconnect. And what is so clear is that, you know, and this is what I know in Indigenous colleagues and friends, and, you know, and really dear friends, is that, you know, from the cradle to the grave, this matrix of laws and you know, and sanctions that Indigenous people are navigating every single day. And so that is the part where, you know, it is no surprise then to see, when you think about the criminal, this to exist on the land is to be a criminal, that there would be so many Indigenous people in prison. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is just the immigration laws, which we know for certain, as we're unpacking here, since the killing of George Floyd, there's been more attention paid to the story of Canada and the racist underpinnings of Canada, and particularly the legal traditions, and especially borders, as you say, and immigration. That that Black people, African people, were denied immigration for many years, in part with this idea that we we couldn't manage the climate of Canada. But it was no coincidence that my Black self was walking down the street and routinely, whether as a child and up to present day, routinely getting a second look by police, and sometimes getting stopped, and so the reality of that kind of surveillance is about the the roots of white supremacy and the beginnings of policing. But then it's the idea of that we, and when I say we, I'm speaking specifically about Indigenous and Black people, are inherently violent and inherently criminal. These are these stereotypes that have been baked in, that actually a lot of it has come not only through schooling, but also through television. It is, kind of when you watch the amount of television that we get, stories that we get, whether it's documentaries, whether it's movies or series that are based on policing, and how many people that are criminal within those stories are routinely either African descent. And the notion of a thug and a notion of who is violent is been reinforced over and over again through media representations, through stereotypes, and through just long traditions of social work, of psychiatry, of the medical system.
It's all
us who is civilized and who is savage.
So this whole thing that you're describing, the harmful stereotypes, David, where did David go? Is so pervasive in East Asian and Southeast Asian communities as well, in the kind of justification of the separation. Oh, there's David. Oh, there you are. Where did you go?
It just kicked me out.
Okay. You scared me for a second there. I was like, no. So I was just saying that this mentality is so pervasive in East Asian and Southeast Asian countries, but particularly for East Asian countries that I'm familiar with, in how the justification it justifies the separation of Black and brown bodies with our communities, with our bodies, and it's guised under the kind of the model minority myth, the upright standing citizen, and the proximity to whiteness is like part of that package. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just something that reminded me of that.
We're thinking, Jen. I was going to also emphasize, because I think that going back to where we opened around the structures that produce race, the yellow peril type of xenophobia that is lingering, that continues to linger as a formation of anti-Asian racism, comes exactly from this state sanction that says that Asians are you can deserve citizenship over Black and Indigenous people because you are slightly more human than those violent people, right? And so that type of that type of psyche, Jen, you and I talk about this all the time too, is for immigrants. I speak for my own community too. I hear it all the time. You literally, when you immigrate, you ascribe to those national ideals, and the policing is built into that, and then and in addition, it's also the anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism that is really built into the model minority myth, Jen, that you described, of that that let's just put it bluntly, gives some Asians, as I mentioned, different intersections of Asians, don't want to blanket us all into the same, but give Asians currency to access a certain forms of whiteness as well. Yeah.
I really appreciate just us kind of unpacking those racial dynamics and hierarchies, and how, the Settler Colonial Project has created those dynamics, and and what that means, and in real sense and lived experiences, and this is a conversation I think is really important for us as we're as we're attempting to redress those harms, and also to create a world that we want to live in that is perhaps, if not more trusting of each other, but is redressing that power dynamic and those hateful underpinnings. So I think it's really important. I mean, I talk about this all the time with Black people around that stratification, and certainly with Indigenous people as well, around how that the model minority shows up, and also the role of policing. I mean, it's if we think about colonization, where colonization has been all around the world, and where and particularly with how England did it, was, to subjugate the Indigenous populations in different ways, and then to import, brown people from various regions around the world in order to kind of do this next layer, this managerial class, and who, ultimately, oftentimes played a policing role over the Indigenous people. And we've seen this play out in a bunch of different ways. And these are, I think, some difficult and hurtful dynamics that persist as we continue to internalize these stories that we are told about who we are as people.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that because other thing that comes up for me in conversations with my family and community around abolition and other things, when we talk about abolition and critique the nation state, if you will, is you talked about sort of the myth of, how do I put it? The myth of Canadian exceptionalism, or this attitude of Canadian exceptionalism. Like we have this, this idea that, that's built into our psyche, that's normalized around Canada. Oh, we're peace loving. We're not Americans, right?
Yeah.
We didn't have slavery, right? That's still something that a lot of people that I know still say, like, slavery is a thing in the US and in other places. We didn't have that here. That's not true, by the way. I'm not going to give the citations, but read Robin Maynard's book. But, I want to sort of maybe...
Cooper as well.
Yeah, I want to unpack that a little bit because, another quick example is, I lived in South Africa for a couple of years, and it was during the time of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in Canada, and I was working for the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in South Africa, and doing some research around the history of some of these policies, these policing policies and colonialism in Canada, and realizing, this was a new learning for me at the time, that actually a lot of the apartheid system was built from the Canadian reserve system. So like for example, the PASS system in South Africa, very much built on a very similar system in Canada. The management, quote unquote, of natives, right, quote unquote, is from that the apartheid government learned. They actually had a special, I forget the name of the ambassador, but in the 60s and 70s, there was actually a special relationship between the Canadian government and the apartheid government in South Africa, so that the South African government could learn about how well we were doing the management of Indigenous people in Canada. And so I wanted to open up that because I think that
jarring.
It's
just jarring. I mean, it's kind of, we say it, but it's jarring. The whole thing is very jarring.
And that's the thing. So I guess my question is, because when I bring this up to family members, community members, this really, I get a lot of resistance, but it also, because exactly, Angela, of what you're saying, this really jarring, everything that we know that is right and good, and being facetious,
cognitive dissonance
about nationalism and the nation state of the colonial government is what we know is good, right? The Canadian dream, right? And again,
we are not the US, et cetera, et cetera.
And so I wonder, how do we have that conversation? Or if, I don't know if either of you have had strategies or tools when you've had this conversation of this type of jarring nature.
I mean, I do every day. I mean, in some way, some version of it. If I may jump in, Jen, I'm not sure. I know.
No, please go ahead.
And I guess the part is always like how we can kind of develop our style and having the conversation. But United States gives Canada a lot of cover. United States gives Canada a lot of cover,
right,
for its racism, and one of the things I like to point out in some of the conversations that I have is just the idea of civilized and savage, which are the terms that are used routinely to talk about Indigenous people and European people. I mean, we even seen this recently. I mean, I don't want to dredge up all of the Joe Rogan kind of.
Oh God, yeah.
But there's so many of those kind of stereotypes in terms of who's civilized, who is civilized, and who is inherently violent. And of course, the United States, in their origin document, their framing document, they actually refer to Indigenous people as savage right in their document of their Declaration of Independence. But Canada has that. Canada has its own version of that. I mean, and I guess, we're here in Black History Month. So part of what I think we are continuing to ask Canadians to undertake is to learn the history. And Canada has, in the Indian Act, language that speaks specifically about savages. And of course, it's done in this very English way, so it's way more polite than the United States. That's just, very straightforward and abrupt.
Polite racism.
And that's it. I mean, I think that's part of it. But I do think that Canadians, got a real lesson in a sense with the recovery, the visibility of the of unmarked graves of Indigenous children in the various locations that are residential schools all across these lands, and in particular in Secwépemc territory. And I think that that's very important for us to kind of think about, and how what we're seeing right now in Ottawa with the occupation and for me, these issues are not separate. The killing of George Floyd that we all watched, the recovery of unmarked graves, the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, and then now this occupation that we're seeing in Ottawa. So I do think that it's hard. I mean, I've got family members who are sympathetic to some of these ideas, and it's we're having a moment of vital importance around pushing forward and having these conversations and sharing information with respect to history, and it is. It's equally as important as we're doing that in telling this, the stories of the kinds of subjugation that Black people have experienced here in Canada, both in terms of laws, but also, we have a very kind of similar experience where, though we like to tell the story that Black people's existence on these territories has a lot to do with the Underground Railroad and and enslaved Africans that came to Canada to be free, which is a part of a story. And it's important for us to also know that, yes, Canada had slavery of Africans as well as Indigenous people. Toronto, if you want to search it, you can learn about Peggy and the sale of Peggy in Toronto, an African woman, her slave auction of her and her son Jupiter. Afua Cooper is one of our wonderful scholars who has been dedicated her life to telling the story of anti-Black, anti-Black experiences, including racism and histories, and that's been her life's work, and she's extraordinary. L. Jones, as you mentioned, and Robin Maynard, who we've talked about as well. But these this kind of unpacking this historical story does require us to give up this dream that somehow Canada is different, and that is a very difficult thing to do. And I'm hoping it's getting harder to hold on to that kind of fantasy. And
somebody once told me that Canada is like 2 years behind the US. I would venture to say we're like a year behind, maybe, if not right there with them in terms of the speed.
COVID speed.
And so David, to answer your initial question around how we have these difficult conversations, I don't know other than to draw from a place of rage, but also like, how do I have a conversation with someone being so enraged? So I'm not sure how to, and again, I think I'm hoping to explore this and practice through the series that we're doing on abolition and community care. But one thing, in reminding myself that there is a rightfulness in that rage. There's this article that actually, David, you had sent. It was like on Harper's Bazaar. There was one quote that I especially kind of resonated with. I'm just going to kind of read that here. when in our bereavement, this government offers hate crime legislation as the only means of achieving safety and of recognizing our pain, it's natural that we may find ourselves in a position to be seduced. And that just really resonated with me because it is such a fucking seduction. And then it goes on to say, after all, don't hate crime laws, at the very least, legitimize our grief and deem our lives worthy of protection and safeguarding? The truth is that these tragedies, the unnecessary loss of life, their perpetually violent pursuit of our people and oppressed peoples everywhere can never be synthesized under an inherently oppressive system. And then it goes on to kind of say, more than just divesting from police and prisons, we achieve safety and justice when we invest in each other. From this vantage point, abolition intersects all other issues: organizing for housing, healthcare, environmental justice naturally complements the work of ending jail expansion, defunding police budgets, and closing ICE detention centers.
Yeah.
So good. Just
Yeah, I think it's Ruth Gilmore. Gilmore is the last name, but the quote, she talks about how, and many other abolitionists as well, that abolition is all about the abolition of police and prisons, but also the conditions that brought someone to incarceration. So to reference what you're talking about, Jen, it's about undoing all of those things as well. It also just reminded me of what was wanting to kind of talk about maybe visions for the future. And I wanted to share this story of, so we opened this Hot Pot Talks sharing these red envelopes that we made.
They're
And
beautiful.
thank you.
Oh,
So we
beautiful.
got a DM from someone who was writing, a Chinese person who was like, this tradition though of the red envelopes is about prosperity and good luck, and it's a happy thing. Why would you put something so angry on a red envelope? And I kind of wanted to open up this part of the conversation with that, because this idea of defunding the police and abolishing prisons, in the sort of neoliberal, narrative, is this totally like, what are you thinking about? Like, how could you abolish the police? But, again, many other abolition scholars have talked about this, and activists have talked about this. I most recently heard this amazing AOC put it this way, and I loved it. And she said, we don't actually have to look very far to see places that have, defunded police. Neighborhoods that are, and Angela, you talked about this, you implied it earlier, but neighborhoods that are wealthy, who are well funded, education is well funded, healthcare is well funded, people are fed, are housed. When we start to add those intersections together, we can then start to sort of reveal also, okay, so we actually know where those are happening, right? The wealthy white suburbs. And so, yeah, I guess I don't know how to frame the question, but it's just reminding me, this conversation of the challenges of the, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Well, maybe I can ask it in a 2-for-1 question. In the like, what are you hopeful of, and what are your visions for the future? But maybe there was one line from your long bio that I didn't get to read out earlier in your introduction, that I really resonated with, and it was around. You say you wrote, you credit the birth of your daughter as a galvanizing event. I just fucking loved that line, and I was wondering if you can share with us, your relationship with your daughter and what that line means, and maybe weave in your vision for the future. I feel like those two fit really well.
I'm feeling that right now. I come from very difficult circumstances, and spent a significant portion of my life, really grappling with poverty and violence and racism and misogyny and racist violence, and left home as a youth, and was living at large for at least kind of 6 years, and from 15 to about age 21, and it was actually, my daughter, getting pregnant with my daughter was the a kind of a stabilizing effect, but it really politicized me, actually, in it for a bunch of reasons. Connected so many dots in the sense of me realizing that, you know, I was having and had a girl, you know, a dark-skinned Black girl in a city that hates Black people to the point of, you know, eliminating a neighborhood and, you know, and you know, and surveilling us in all kinds of ways, and both overtly through policing, but also in other many ways. The microaggressions are brutal, as well as just the aggressions. And so I wanted so much to be a part of making a world that was going to be different for her. And that meant for me really about recognizing the making of this nation as a nation to colonization. It was about white supremacy and racism and misogyny and where it intersects. It was most definitely about you know, heteronormative doctrines and all of the violence that is in effect to entrench that. And I didn't want my daughter to have to experience that.
Yeah.
And knowing that there's very few safe places and I wanted, you know, to be a space that could be safe, recognizing that there's very few safe places that, you know, that I had, and that, you know, so that politicized me in a major way. And so she's you know, like the sunrise and the sunset for me, as far as, you know, what it means, and trying to, you know, and it's been her and I kind of against the world in a sense in navigating, you know, all of these forces that I just said. But it's also the birth of her was also, you know, the key reason for like driving me toward trying to redress these realities. And so, like I said, I became politicized. But it was about those intersections. It wasn't just one thing. It was a lot of things, kind of all you know, converging, and state violence being a big part of that. One of the things that people don't know, I don't talk about it a lot. It's not a secret, but I, you know, I experienced a considerable amount of criminalization as a girl in the U.S. While I was there for a time, and I'm just so aware of like the kind of what it means to be in a police state, and what it means to be surveilled, and also to, you know, to be in prison, to be in not only kind of city, you know, county jails, but in, you know, in a penitentiary. And so that you know, those kinds of lived experiences, you know, it's really I've been kind of confronted in many ways, to the extent to which I've attempted, like I said, to try and work with the police, and now spending increasingly more energy into building and talking about ways in which we can have a community-based response. For example, around gender-based violence that is, you know, deeply in recognition of these forces that subjugate and criminalize, and so that's what I really focused on. I wish I could have some of that Vancouver Police Department budget, because I am so clear of what kinds of things that we could do that would continue to bring more safety to survivors of gender-based violence, of who are Black, who are Indigenous, who are East Asian and South Asian, and, you know, and who are Latina, who are from all the corners of the globe, and, you know, and with languages. I'm so clear about that, as well as creating space for those that do harm, those that do violence, creating space for accountability. You know, violence begets violence, you know, and we know that there's, you know, lots of hurt and harm that it's, you know, that is in the hearts and in acting the behavior of those that do that harm. And the police solution is not a solution. I mean, it doesn't keep women safer. And so I wish that I could have some of that VPD budget, because I know so well what we could invest in, quite frankly, just here in this, you know, little city, that would go a long way to keeping women and femmes safe, about, you know, addressing intimate partner violence, you know, in the spectrum in terms of gender and sexual orientation, and then and along race and class lines. again, in supporting those that do harm. I mean, that's sort of where my focus goes, because I believe that those kind of interactions, those our intimate relationships, are that violence that happens, between two people is in this context, that's broader context. So I think there's so much work that can be done with two people as well as the context. So I feel like those connections are really important.
Could you do you mind just sharing some of the, because I think I'm just thinking about some folks who are hearing like, what? How could
Right.
no police response? What is it? What could a community-based response for gender-based violence look like?
Well, one of the things that we I mean, and some of it's kind of, we're just kind of dreaming it. But we've been doing outreach both on the street, but also in other ways, in supporting survivors, supporting victims, because I like the word survivor and victim is kind of a tricky word, because we've had more femicides. There's been more killing of female identified people and women identified people in Canada so far in 2022 than we've seen in a long time. And what's interesting is many of those cases, there's been, police involvement historically. So, the police, aren't going to necessarily can't respond to that. They can investigate, in a sense. I mean, that's something that I think can be helpful in terms of helping to gather information about how to help somebody. But the criminal response around hasn't been and continues to not be effective in bringing a measure of justice or safety for survivors. I can't tell you to the extent to which it doesn't. So I do think the community-based response, there are so many incredible organizations that are all around the province in Canada who, if they had the resources, could really support ways in which communities, families, friends, to have support those conversations about these issues and to help build safer options. We know that many survivors are telling friends and family about what's happening, when many victim survivors are telling friends and family. So if we had more resources in terms of building a broader community response, that would be about safety for the victim survivor, and then also accountability for those that have been harmed. I know that we've had these kinds of structures in place in our communities prior to colonization. This is the only way that humans have interacted with each other, and I disagree. And there's no evidence to say that we did. And we managed to do things, not to say that it's to make it kind of, to glorify it in the sense, because humans are humans, and and there's some things that like that are violent in terms of how people have responded to those things historically, in terms of killing perpetrators and that kind of thing. But we have to recognize that police is a relatively new instrument that is being sold to us as a safety mechanism for survivors, and it's not. By and large, it's not. Huge piece of the work that we end up doing, the team, the amazing people that I get to work with every day, is holding the police accountable for the ways in which they don't do what they say they're supposed to do in terms of their investigation, and just so many things. I can't even tell you all the things. And then police complaints. Like I've made this joke, but it's barely a joke. I would love to have somebody that could just write complaints all day, like in terms of following their own policies. So I think investment into restorative justice, transformative justice, those are all I think thoughtful, emerging, in terms of more resources, ways of looking at accountability. I'd like to go a step back and to create more space for survivors to have more options, and more information about what's happening in relationships, and so what I think about what we were able to do with our little bit of resources, and I think if we had just for example, a couple of those billions.
Oh my God.
Just in a city, in order to just address violence against, in intimate partner violence and sexualized violence in this city, we could do a lot. around education and information and support services and and helping people that do harm.
Mm.
The timing of that police siren was very appropriate.
All day. I want to just give an example of resources, and I watched. I live in the Downtown Eastside vicinity, and I watched four Vancouver police officers, had this man who had a physical disability, and he was kind of on the ground, and he was pushing himself on a improvised skateboard that was mobility device. And I saw four police officers jacking him up to take away some cigarettes that he had. At four of them, and all the genders were there. There were several races there in terms of those four, and they were there taking his cigarettes, and he was pleading with them, like almost to tears, to not take his cigarettes, because that was currency to him.
Yeah.
And just thinking about doing that, what would it take to actually do that as a human being, with and the amount of money that interaction was, using just on that interaction, which was, from my point of view, useless and harmful in terms of safety and laws, and just if I could even have that revenue and stop that, if we could stop that, and put whatever that costs into other things, we would go a long way to remedying whatever that man needs, that those cigarettes represent to him. If we could invest in that, that would be a more useful use of time and energy and psychic ability. I can't imagine what goes on in your heart when you're engaging in that behavior. How many things you have to believe and shut down in yourself in order to jack somebody up that's such a serious disability, it's clearly in poverty, and begging you not to take this currency.
Yeah, it's atrocious.
Angela, I'm wondering, we're kind of running close to our allotted time. What is time?
It always flies by.
But I wonder, what can people do to support your work? Or I'm just thinking, if people want to take a next step and support your work, what could someone do?
Well, I think thank you for that, and I think you've selected a really great organization right now, in terms of Defund 604 Network, and that I know that's been the organization that is featured through these conversations, the hot pot talks. I think that's the network they're on the front lines of this in Vancouver. We're doing our thing, certainly around gender-based violence, and certainly, around policing, and, and dreaming and putting into action what we think is, that's working around the community-based response, and, and seeking funding for that in different ways. But this conversation that Defund 604 Network is doing is, and leading is, I think that you're right to continue to ask your viewers and your supporters, love intersection supporters, and and your art collective to fund right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Angela. I just want to feature this comment with our dear friend Kona. Too much awesome in Angela. Love Kona. Hi, Kona.
Hi, Kona. We should though, before we end, we have to ask the question. We ask all of our guests this question.
Okay, you ask.
Yes. No, you ask.
We have one consistent standing question that we ask all of our guests on Hot Pot Talks, which is, what is your favorite hot pot ingredient or experience, if you have one?
Oh, I love this. Oh, I have to tell this. So my beloved sisters, they're adopted, they're, my chosen family. Jody, Cassandra, Brandy, Teresa, We call ourselves the 604s. It's
Oh.
kind of a long story. So Jody had a birthday in December, and her daughter-in-law hooked us up with hot pot, just at the table, and it was incredible. We had all the kinds of meats, of course, and vegetables, and I'm doing mostly vegan now, so we had this beautiful broth and vegetables and tofu. It was so much fun. Just the feeling of sisterhood, the connecting as chosen family. Celebrating a birthday of our loved ones, and enjoying hot pot at my beloved sister's home. It is was such a wonderful experience, and of course delicious. And it felt so decadent, just like all the options and all the vegetables and sharing and laughing. It was just
Amazing.
Fed my spirit so much.
Love to hear it. Love
Amazing.
it. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you so
don't
much,
go
Angela.
anywhere. We're going to announce next week's. Thank you so much, Angela. Okay, David, that was. I have a lot of thoughts. My mind is like racing. We should announce next.
Also, I
next
just
Hot Pot Talks.
wanted to quickly mention too, we are going to have another Hot Pot Talks on abolition. I don't know what date it is, but we are having another one on this topic as well. So if folks want to join us, it's next Friday.
Next Friday, the 18th.
February 18th, same time, same place. I can announce next week's Hot Pot Talks.
Yes, and I'll just put on a flyer.
Yeah, so the next episode, I'm gonna hide us. Oh, it didn't do what I thought it would do. Oh, here we go. Here we go. All right. So the next episode will feature guests Laiwan and Kimberly Wong. It's called Chinatown Futures. What is the future of Chinatowns? While the history of racial enclaves is embedded in histories of xenophobia and racism, Chinatowns as a theme and as a space have become a nexus of social tension and simultaneously an intersection of community organizing on intergenerational issues of social justice. In this panel, we will explore these imbricated themes of a mutating yellow peril xenophobia, cultural capital, gentrification, displacement, neoliberalism, boba liberalism, exploring what Chinatown might hold in our imagining of futures. Great. Oh,
sorry.
It's okay.
You're in school doing your PhD when you have the word imbricated. I don't even know what that means. Okay, we have run out of time. Thank you
everyone.
so much, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye.